Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and seeking out and capturing really rare Pokemon is one of the most fun aspects of the Pokemon series. That's why shiny hunting is the popular activity that it is. The other day though, I started to think about what exactly counts as a rare Pokemon. Legendary Pokemon are of course considered rare because almost no one in the Pokemon world has actually seen them. Pseudo-legendary Pokemon and starters are widely considered rare as well because they are really hard to find in the Pokemon world. But which Pokemon are actually numerically the rarest in the games? Which Pokemon are the hardest for players like you and me to find while playing a Pokemon game? I wanted to know the answer to that question, so I spent quite a long time researching to figure out exactly what the rarest Pokemon is in each and every one of the main series Pokemon games. Before I dive into the list though, I have to further clarify what exactly counts as the rarest Pokemon. For the purposes of this video, a game's rarest Pokemon is the species that is found with the lowest encounter rate percentage in the fewest number of places. I will also be considering whether there's some method involved to find the Pokemon that makes finding it substantially harder. Also for this video, each member of an evolutionary line will be kept totally separate from its other stages. For example, Magikarp can be found with a higher encounter rate and in more places than Gyarados. So while Magikarp evolves into Gyarados, effectively making Gyarados not that hard to obtain, what matters is the Pokemon you find in the wild. So therefore, Gyarados is a much rarer Pokemon than Magikarp. I will also be excluding several Pokemon for various reasons. The first exclusion is Pokemon where you can only obtain a predetermined set amount of them, excluding breeding, such as legendaries or starters. Since there's only one of this Pokemon in the entire game, sometimes more, that I guess technically makes them the rarest because there's just one. However, if you know how to get them, they're virtually guaranteed, so they're not as rare because there's no chance involved. I'm focusing on Pokemon where the chance to find them is the lowest. The next exclusion is shiny Pokemon. Obviously, the shiny form of a Pokemon is much more rare than its regular form, so there's not really a need to mention them in this video because they would just be the entire list. Just make everything on this list shiny, like what's the point of doing that? And finally, I am excluding Feebas. You are likely aware that in generations 3 and 4, Feebas could only be found in a few particular tiles in one location in each game. So therefore, it's really difficult to obtain. However, if you know the correct tiles, your chance of reeling one in is 50%. So I just didn't think that counted as rare enough based on the ranking system I'm using, so I figured it best not to include it here. Alright, I think that about covers all the intro stuff. Sorry that took a while, but now let's dive into the rarest Pokemon in every game. First is Generation 1, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Now, you might assume that the rarest Pokemon in each of these games is actually the same across all three games, but that's not the case. In newer Pokemon games, encounter tables tend to be pretty uniform between versions. Like, every Pokemon is the same except version exclusives. However, for Red, Blue, and Yellow, the encounter tables varied wildly between the games. Like, even with Pokemon that weren't version exclusives, so there's actually a unique rarest Pokemon for all three of these games. You might also assume that the rarest Pokemon in these games would be a Safari Zone Pokemon, a location famous for housing really rare Pokemon like Kangaskhan, Tauros, or Scyther. However, while these Pokemon only have a 1% encounter rate in one section of the Safari Zone, they have a 4% in another section. They're simply not rare enough. Red version's rarest Pokemon is actually Golduck. It is only found with a 1% encounter rate on the first floor of the Seafoam Islands. It's not even found on any other floor of the islands, just the first floor. Blue version's rarest Pokemon is actually found in the exact same place with the same encounter rate, it's just a different species. That Pokemon is Slowbro. It's only found with a 1% encounter rate, again, on the first floor of the Seafoam Islands. Neither Golduck nor Slowbro are version exclusives in Red and Blue, but they are treated like pseudo-version exclusives, where one is far harder to find than the other, reversed in each game. In Red, while Golduck is only found on one floor, Slowbro is found on two, one of which has a 4% encounter rate. In Blue, the places of Slowbro and Golduck are perfectly swapped. In Yellow version though, Slowbro and Golduck were made available outside of the Seafoam Islands with much better encounter rates, so they're no longer the rarest Pokemon. Actually, the rarest Pokemon in Yellow was a Pokemon that was much easier to obtain in Red and Blue, but was made much harder to find in Yellow. That Pokemon is Dodrio. Like Slowbro and Golduck, it can only be found with a 1% encounter rate in one singular location. That location being Route 17, the cycling road. There's just one patch of grass on that route, and that is the only place in the entire game that you can find wild Dodrio. The place in Red and Blue where Dodrio was much easier to find was actually Cerulean Cave. Dodrio can be found on 2 of the 3 floors, and on one of them it has a 25% encounter rate. It's crazy to think how it went from reasonably easy to find in Red and Blue to being the rarest Pokemon in the game in Yellow. Now it's time for Generation 2, Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. And unlike Generation 1, the rarest Pokemon is the same in all 3 versions. That Pokemon is Dunsparce. Dunsparce, like all of the Generation 1 rarest Pokemon, can only be found in one location with just a 1% encounter rate. That location is the Violet City side of Dark Cave. Yes, just one side of it. I think it's kind of crazy and kind of dumb that a Pokemon with such little use in battle is the rarest Pokemon in the game. Although, I suppose that means the sparse part of its name is an accurate term. Next we have Generation 3, and we'll start with the Hoenn games, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Like with Generation 2, all 3 of these games have the same rarest Pokemon. Many people believe that Chimecho is the rarest Pokemon in the Gen 3 Hoenn games, because after all, it can only be found on the summit of Mount Pyre with just a 2% encounter rate. However, there are actually 2 species of Pokemon that can also only be found in one location, but with 1% encounter rates. And yes, there are 2 species. The rarest Pokemon in these games is actually a tie. The first is Wailord. While Wailmer are a dime a dozen, Wailord can only be found on Route 129 by surfing with just a 1% encounter rate. I think it's weird that that's the only water route that you can find Wailord in, since there's a lot of water routes in Hoenn, but that's what it is, just Route 129. The other rarest Pokemon is Magneton. Magneton can only be found within New Mauville, again with just a 1% encounter rate. However, it's actually not the only Pokemon within New Mauville that has that really low encounter rate. The other 1% encounter rate Pokemon is Electrode, but it doesn't get to share the crown of rarest Pokemon in these games because it is also found in the Team Magma or Aqua hideout. Now I know what some of you are thinking, that I said I wouldn't be including static encounter Pokemon, but that's actually not what I said. What I did say was that I would not be including Pokemon where you can only obtain a predetermined amount of them. So while you can only obtain 2 Electrode in the hideout, you can obtain an unlimited amount in New Mauville, so it qualifies here. So since you can find Electrode in more than one place, and you can only find Magneton and Wailord in one place each, they are the Pokemon that get to be called the rarest. Now for the first remakes on this list, Fire Red and Leaf Green. You might expect that the rarest Pokemon in these games would be similar to the ones in Gen 1, but nope, totally different because the encounter tables in the newer games are wildly different from the originals. The rarest Pokemon in Fire Red and Leaf Green is Dragonair. It can only be found via fishing in the Safari Zone with the Super Rod, and you only have a 1% chance to reel one in. Now I should mention that Dragonair is available in all 4 areas of the Safari Zone, which based on my system for this video, count as unique locations. Therefore, it's not as rare as a lot of the other Pokemon, actually all of the other Pokemon we've discussed on this list so far. Also, there are other Pokemon in Fire Red and Leaf Green that are found in fewer locations than 4. There's not a single other Pokemon in all of Fire Red and Leaf Green whose best encounter rate is 1%. The 1% Safari Zone Pokemon can be found in another area at 4%, just like in Gen 1. Therefore, since 1% is the best encounter rate you're getting for a Dragonair, and that is the best encounter rate for any Pokemon in the whole game, Dragonair is the rarest Pokemon. Now it's time for Generation 4, starting with the Sinnoh games of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. The rarest Pokemon is the same throughout all 3 of these games, and it's actually the rarest Pokemon we've discussed on this list so far. The rarest Pokemon is Munchlax. Like the other Pokemon we've discussed so far, it's only found with a 1% encounter rate, However, it goes beyond that, because Munchlax is only found on honey trees. If you didn't know, to get Pokemon to show up on honey trees in the Sinnoh games, you have to slather honey on the tree, wait 6 whole hours, then come back and check. If you don't check the tree before 24 hours after the Pokemon spawns, whatever's there is gonna disappear. And there's no way to cheese this. Advancing the clock in the DS won't cause time to advance for the honey trees, so you have to wait 6 hours no matter what. Also, the species of the Pokemon is determined when honey is slathered, not when you come back 6 hours later. So while you could save in front of the tree to reset for natures or IVs or shininess, once the species is determined, that's what you're getting. As an extra slap in the face, there is a 9% or 10% chance that no Pokemon will show up at all. 6 hours. You wait 6 hours and nothing shows up. Oh, and it actually still gets worse. Of the 21 honey trees in the Sinnoh region, only 4 can spawn Munchlax. And which 4 those are is randomized every time you start a new playthrough. So you can't just look up which trees are the Munchlax ones, you just have to figure it out via trial and error with an egregiously time-consuming method. And even if you know the Munchlax trees, it still only has a 1% encounter rate. A spawn rate that low on only 4 random trees using a method that takes 6 hours per encounter is just, oh my gosh, that is by far and away the rarest Pokemon we've discussed so far. If you want a Munchlax in these games, just breed a Snorlax. Next is Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and this entry isn't that exciting. Hey there, different shirt Michael here, cause I made a mistake that thankfully my editor Katie caught while editing the video. I originally was going to say that Dunsparce was the rarest Pokemon in these games, just like in Gen 2, because it can only be found with a 1% encounter rate just in one side of Dark Cave. Well, as it turns out, not only can it swarm up to a much higher encounter rate, also if you Rock Smash in Dark Cave, there's a 90% chance of it being a Dunsparce. So yeah, it's not Dunsparce. What is actually the rarest Pokemon in Heart Gold and Soul Silver is a repeat from another remake, that being Dragonair. It can only be found by fishing with a super rod in the Dragon's Den, and there's only a 3% chance of reeling one in. You may be wondering why a Pokemon with a 3% encounter rate is the rarest Pokemon when there are several that only have 1% encounter rates. Well, that's because every single 1% encounter rate Pokemon can swarm, like I mentioned earlier, which gives them an encounter rate of 30 or 40%. Dragonair has the worst best encounter rate and can only be found in one place, so it's the rarest. Also, I do want to mention, because I know somebody's gonna bring it up, Bulbapedia says that Dragonair's encounter rate in the Dragon's Den is 10%, and that's actually incorrect. Both Cerebi and the encounter table data that I was using to make this video say that it is a 3% encounter rate. Plus, Pokemon in the same encounter slot as Dragonair in other locations with the Super Rod, like Lanturn on Cinnabar Island, also have 3%. It's a mistake on Bulbapedia. Dragonair's encounter rate is 3%, I promise. On to Generation 5. This generation introduced Shaking Spots, an interesting new encounter method that allows you to find Pokemon that you otherwise could not find on that route. It's also a tougher method than just running around in the grass, because you have to wait for just one shaking spot to show up. So if a Pokemon is rare in a shaking spot, it's one of the rarest in the game. And that is the case for Black and White. The rarest Pokemon in those games is Dragonite, which can only be found by fishing it up from a rippling water spot at the Dragon Spiral Tower with just a 1% chance. So like many other Pokemon we discussed, it only has a 1% encounter rate in just one location. However, having to find a rippling spot adds an extra layer of difficulty to the encounter, making Dragonite the rarest Pokemon in Black and White, but not Black 2 and White 2. Black 2 and White 2 introduced a new encounter mechanic, Hidden Grottos. These subtle locations will spawn items most of the time, but they can spawn Pokemon, some of which are not found anywhere else. However, the method is tough. There's only a 20% chance of any Pokemon at all being in the Hidden Grotto, and once you've emptied it out, you have to walk 256 steps in the game just for a 5% chance of something respawning. The only more time-consuming and tedious method we've discussed so far is honey trees. Several Pokemon found in Hidden Grottos only have a 1% chance to show up each time the grotto spawns something new. and some of those Pokemon can't be found anywhere else in the game. That means these Pokemon are the rarest in the games because they have such a low rate combined with such a tough method. In Black 2, that set of Pokemon is Granbull, Lombre, Medicham, and Murkrow. In White 2, the set is the same, except replace Medicham with Hariyama. That's because in Black 2, Hariyama has a 15% encounter rate in the Hidden Grotto, while Medicham only has 1%. Those encounter rates are reversed in White 2. Next is Generation 6 with X and Y, and for these we're back to a simple wild encounter. The rarest Pokemon in these games is Abomasnow, found within the snow on Route 17. It only has a 1% encounter rate there, and it's not found anywhere else. Next we have Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, who actually do not share their rarest Pokemon with their predecessors. One of the big reasons for that is that Pokemon were made easier to find all across the board. Not a single Pokemon in the entirety of these games has below 4% as its best encounter rate. So, for example, while Surskit can only be found with a 1% rate in some places, it's found at 15% in others. Therefore, the rarest Pokemon in these games are those with 4% encounter rates in only one location, and there are 2 in each game. In Omega Ruby, it's Ralts and Volbeat, with Ralts being found on Route 102 and Volbeat being found on Route 117. In Alpha Sapphire, it's the same, except substitute Volbeat with Illumise. Chimecho's encounter rate was actually buffed up to 5% in these games, which I think is funny. So many people think that Chimecho is the rarest Hoenn Pokemon, but it's not actually the rarest Pokemon in any version of Hoenn. Also, before I move on from ORAS, I should mention that there are some Pokemon that are only found via the Dex Nav in just one particular location, like Zorua on Route 101. However, we don't actually have data on their encounter percentages, so I can't properly compare them to the other Pokemon that we do have the percentages for. So I thought it was the safest bet to just exclude DexNav Pokemon for this video. Now for Generation 7, which introduced the SOS calling method. While most of the time a Pokemon will only call in members of its same species, there are instances of Pokemon calling in other species, some of which are very rare. The rarest Pokemon in Sun and Moon is Salamence, thanks to the SOS calling method. It can only be called into battle by a Bagon on Route 3, a route in which Bagon only has a 1% encounter rate. Then, once in battle, each time Bagon successfully calls in a Pokemon, there's only a 1% chance of that Pokemon being a Salamence. A wild, level 9 to 12 Salamence. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Salamence is still the rarest Pokemon, but another Pokemon in an identical scenario was added, making it a tie. That Pokemon being Volcarona. Larvesta can only be found with a 1% encounter rate in the Lush Jungle Cave, and like with Bagon and Salamence, each time it calls a Pokemon in for help, there's a 1% chance that that Pokemon will be Volcarona. And the final games we'll be discussing in this video, since we don't know anything about Sword and Shield yet, are Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. And the rarest Pokemon in these games, by far, are the non-static legendary birds. Let's Go has what I call special spawns. They're also called rare spawns, but I don't like that term because it seems too general and kind of confusing. But special spawn Pokemon are those that are found with a very low encounter rate, but as you build up a catch combo of any species, their encounter rate goes up. With these special spawns, unlike 1% encounter rate Pokemon in certain routes, only one can be on the field at any particular time. However, it gets to the point if your catch combo is high enough, as soon as one goes away, another one will show up almost instantly. The legendary birds are post-game special spawns, but they are far rarer than the others. While special spawns will very occasionally show up without a catch combo, the legendary birds virtually never do. Even with a high catch combo, they are exceedingly rare. We don't know their exact spawn percentage, but I have the experience to know that nothing is rarer. I got a shiny of every single Pokemon in the Kanto Pokedex, so therefore I spent a lot of time with a high catch combo. And during all of those gameplay hours, I saw 5, maybe 6 legendary birds? That's it. So while they're found all over Kanto and are guaranteed encounters in their usual locations, the special spawn ones are just so freaking rare that I had to give them the Let's Go Rarest Pokemon crown. If you have a shiny legendary bird that you found flying around Kanto, Congratulations, you have by far the rarest Pokemon in these games. So there we have it, those were the rarest Pokemon in every single main series game. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and want to see some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend this video here. Alright, that's all I have for now, so till next time, Poke fans. Gotta catch them all!